Hi everyone, I'm Shelley and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. I'm back with another Question the Narrative video, and today's topic is Blemmies, aka the Headless Men. I remember the first time I came across any mention of these creatures was on the John Levi channel. And while they're not as widespread as, say, the Sasquatch or even the Doghead that I did a video about maybe a week or two ago, they are still mentioned not only in some historical narratives, but also in some literature. And as with the Dogheads, I am not coming to any conclusions about these creatures in this video. I just thought that it would be fun to peruse some articles about them because I like this sort of thing. I definitely think that this qualifies as a cryptid, and I am huge on cryptids. I think they're a lot of fun. So let's just see what else we can find out about them. This article is a good place to just get started on them because it's rather short, but it gives you most of the basic knowledge about them. And I also wanted to share, before I even start this, if you saw my video about the Doghead, the reason that I felt like I wanted to do a video about that was because I found out that there was actually a place named after the Doghead. Now, of course, they say that it's because there were hills shaped like dogheads. But the fact that there was a battle called the Battle of Cynocephaly and dogheads are called cynocephalists, that really, got me scratching my head. And actually the Blemyes were mentioned in several of the articles about the cynocephalists as well, because they were often said to exist in the same regions. So if we follow the same thought pattern that I had with the cynocephalus and the fact that there was a region that was called cynocephaly, well, guess what? The Blemmies were also an actual group of people. And they were in Africa, and we'll read a little bit about them in a little bit. But yes, same thing. They were an actual group of people. And at least from looking at this photo, they were not headless. And again, these are the descendants of them. They're not specifically the ones that were called Blemmies, but we'll get to that in a bit. First, I just wanted to go over this article with you. It says Blemmies are a mythological species of humanoids with no differentiated head and whose mouth and facial features are instead located on their chests. Different authors have placed them in different parts of the world, from Ethiopia to India to Venezuela. They're also notably encountered by Alexander the Great in the medieval classic Roman de Alexandria and prose. In some portrayals, the Blemmies are covered in fur. In others, their skin is mostly furless and human-like. So if we stop there, I think that the fact that some of them are covered in fur is especially interesting because there are some who speculate that the Blemmies may actually be a form of Sasquatch. Because if you look at a Sasquatch, this is a back view, but they're typically described as having a head that is set very low on the shoulders, so having very short necks. So there are some who are saying, well, maybe the Blemmies or the Headless Men were Sasquatch, and I certainly think that that's a possibility. Herodotus, referring to them as Acophaloi or Headless, cites them as inhabitants of ancient Libya, along with other mythical races such as the cynocephaly. So that's what I was talking about earlier, was the dogheads. Pliny the Elder also includes them in his Natural History as inhabitants of the region of Ethiopia. In later traditions, they're specified as inhabiting an island in the Brizone River. According to the Isidore of Seville, there exist two different varieties of Blemmies, one with their eyes on the chest and one with the eyes on the shoulders. And typically when I've seen photographs, or not photographs because we don't have any actual pictures of them, obviously, but when I see depictions of them, it's usually the ones with the eyes on the chest. That's the most popular. By the time of the late Middle Ages, some maps presented the Blemmies along with the cynocephaly as inhabitants of India, whereas others continued to place them in Ethiopia. The travels of Sir John Mandeville places them on the Andaman Islands. In the late 16th century, Sir Walter Raleigh described these creatures as dwelling in the banks of the Cara River in Venezuela and referred to them by the name Iwaipanoma. In Japan, these creatures are known as Donatsura. So here is an illustration of a Donatsura. And, I'm noticing as we're reading more about this that it's actually more widespread than I thought it was. When I'm reading these articles with you now, this is the first time that I'm reading them too. So I'm just kind of exploring with you. My children are gone. They're at youth group. I've got a quiet house. So I thought it would be a good time to do this because these videos do tend to be a little bit longer. But yeah, so far we have them located in Libya, in Venezuela. Now in Japan, they have a name for them. Ethiopia was another place. So certainly farther out around the world than what I originally thought. And these Blemyes, or headless men, are actually mentioned in several pieces of literature, such as Othello, The Tempest, The Amazing Voyage of Azam, Baudolino, and L'Autor dea Solitudini by Valerio Massimo Manfredi. So those are some more contemporary pieces, but we do see 17th century literature also had the Blemyes in them as well. Since we do know that there was an actual people group named the Blemyes, let's read a little bit about them just to kind of give some background. It says the Blemyes were an eastern desert people who appeared in written sources from the 7th century BC until the 8th century AD. By the late 4th century, they had occupied Lower Nubia and established a kingdom. From inscriptions in the Temple of Isis at Philae, a considerable amount is known by the structure of the Blemmyian state. The Blemyes are usually identified as one of the components of the archaeological X-group culture that flourished in late antiquity. Their identification with the Beja people who have inhabited the same region since the Middle Ages is generally accepted. So when I mentioned this picture here, so this is one of the Beja or Beja people who is thought to be a descendant of the Blemyes. I'm just going to skip down here. The Greek term first appears in the 3rd century BC in one of the poems of Theocritus and in Eratosthenes, who is cited in Strabo's Geographica, 1st century AD. Eratosthenes described the Blemyes as living with the Megaboroi in the land between the Nile and the Red Sea north of Meroe. Strabo himself, locating them south of Syene, describes them as nomadic raiders but not bellicose. In later writings, the Blemyes are described in stereotypical terms as barbarians living south of Egypt. Pomponius Mela and Pliny the Elder described them as headless beings with their faces on their chests. So while I researched the Battle of Cynocephalae and tried to find some sort of link between the dog heads and that battle, there was no link, at least that I could find in any of the articles. However, right there we do see that there was a link, and it was thought to just have come about as being a stereotype of the actual people, the Blemyes. This little tidbit is on the Ripley's Believe It or Not website, and I just wanted to share this part with you. It says, what the Libyans say. Although it sounds surreal today, headless Blemyes were once considered a bona fide people group, thriving along the frontiers of discovery, close enough to make occasional appearances, but distant enough to prevent debunking. Between their humanoid appearances and their ability to appear and disappear at random, they had a lot in common with modern-day Sasquatches. Fortunately, they lacked the rank smell, blood-curdling screams, and furry feet. Of course, one of the most vital areas of evidence regarding the existence of Bigfoot remains the great body of eyewitness accounts and oral histories. These include oral traditions stretching back to the pre-Columbian period in North America. But if you think that's a clincher, wait until you see the incredible evidence related to the headless Blemyes. They had so much documentation on these creatures that people remained convinced of their existence for centuries. The first historian to delve into describing headless Blemyes was Herodotus. In the 5th century BC, this ancient Greek author and father of historical narratives described them as headless creatures with eyes in their chests, at least that is what the Libyans say. in his work The Histories. Herodotus also explained that where the tribe lived in Libya was filled with hilly, lush forests, the ideal place for eye-catching humanoids to hide. Herodotus would be far from the last famous historical figure to discuss this tribe. For example, Strabo, a 1st century Greek geographer, described Blemyes as an honest-to-goodness people group inhabiting southern Nubia. Other scholars chimed in over the years thanks to a robust tradition of scholasticism. These individuals represented a laundry list of famous figures, including Pliny the Elder, Sir Walter Raleigh, and Isidore of Seville. Sir Walter Raleigh's account of these creatures in the New World is both funky and fascinating. He referred to them as Eyewitness or Iwaipanoma, stating that they are reported to have their eyes in their shoulders and their mouths in the middle of their breasts, and that a long train of hair growth backward between their shoulders. What's more, references to the legend also made their way into medieval maps by cartographers and explorers like Andrea Bianco, Piri Reis, and the 12th century Hereford Mappa Mundi. These references and images by famous historians, natural philosophers, cartographers, and explorers helped the headless Blemyes gain even more traction. But despite all the anecdotes, the search for the headless Blemyes, like so many other cryptid ventures, have so far headed nowhere, pun intended. So I was able to find a depiction of the Piri Reis map, and right here is where you can see one of the headless men, or the Blemyes. Let's see how close we can get. So that's it right there. And I do have a close-up also. It's kind of fuzzy, but we have this one also. And again, that's just the same the one that we just looked at, the Piri Reis map. So yes, they are on these maps. Here on the justhistorypost.com website, there's an article called Mythical Creatures, the Headless Blemyes. And as always, I always link all of the articles that I refer to in the description if you wanted to take a closer look after, watching, or while watching, or instead of watching, but regardless. Although people living in medieval Europe knew a lot more of the wider world than many initially think, with strong trade links in Asia and northern Africa, they were still intrigued about what lay beyond the land known to man, and stories of mythical creatures abounded. One such creature which fascinated for centuries was the blemy. These creatures were said to be a type of man who lived in Africa, but they did not have a head. Rather, their face appeared on their chest, their shoulders above them. So in this photo, this is the blemy. This is also said to be a type of humanoid creature. That one I'm kind of incredulous about. I mean, you should be incredulous about all of them, honestly. But this one I'm like, I don't know how that would have gotten around and survived. But you never know. The Blemyes were, in fact, a real African people, forming a nomadic kingdom in northern Nubia between 600 BC and 300 AD. Even from their early origins, however, stories were told of their headless nature. Herodotus, who lived between 484 and 425 BC, wrote in his histories that they were known as the Acapholoi, or those without a head, and that they lived on the eastern edge of Libya. A few centuries later, in 45 AD, Mela, a Roman geographer, wrote that the blemy lived in Africa and had their faces in their chests. And this was confirmed by Pliny the Elder, who said the tribe had no heads, their mouths and eyes being seated in their breasts. And again, he also located them in Ethiopia or Nubia. The stories of these strange headless men continued long after the real blemy tribe was gone. In medieval Europe, drawings of these creatures can be found in manuscripts and in the extremities of world maps charting the unknown, like the Piri Reis map that I just shared with you. A drawing of a blemy features in an Anglo-Saxon manuscript in the British Library dating to 1025, and blemmies are also found on the Hereford Mappa Mundi of 1300, the largest medieval map to exist. Isidore of Seville, from 560 to 636 AD, explains in his Etymologies, people believe that in Libya, blemy are born as trunks without heads, and have their mouth and eyes on their chest. Others, born without necks, have their eyes on their shoulders. And I just want to let you look a little bit closer at some of these depictions of these blemy. Blemyes, Blemmyes, I don't know the plural. This would be the Blemy here. Possibly that one too. Right here we have the Blemy. This is the Hereford Mappamundi. So we have those. As the centuries progressed, stories of the Blemyes continued, and they moved with the boundaries of exploration. In the late medieval period, some are shown as being in India, such as on the 1436 Andrea Bianco map. As the 16th century arrived and the discovery of the Americas began, the Blemyes moved across the seas. Ottoman Admiral Piri Reis, which is, again, that's the map that I showed you before, placed a Blemy on his 1513 world map near the coast of Brazil and put a description next to the drawing. He said that Blemyes grew to around 5'3", their eyes were close together, but that they were harmless. So, according to Piri Reis, he saw them in Brazil as well. So, what do we have now? So, now we have Brazil, Ethiopia, I'm doing this from memory, Brazil, Ethiopia, Venezuela, Libya, and there was a mention of them in Japan, just by a different name. In 1596, Sir Walter Raleigh wrote a book about his journey to Guyana, so another place, where he reports that there was a nation of people whose heads appear not above their shoulders, who are reported to have their eyes in their shoulders and their mouths in the middle of their breasts, and this is the one that we keep reading. Although Raleigh did not see these people for himself, he decided that the stories were truthful, as everyone he met there confirmed it. So I think that in a lot of cases, the people who are writing about the Blemyes are writing them on what you might call eyewitness testimony, or just on, oral tradition. So I don't know that any of the people mentioned who wrote about them actually had, a firsthand witnessing of them. So in this article, we have a photo. It says an engraving showing from left to right a monopod or ceopod, a female cyclops, conjoined twins, a Blemy, and a cynocephaly. So, it's interesting that we do know that there are conjoined twins. And, not to say that these are all going to be, just as real, although, again, you never know, because one thing that I'm actually going to point out before even going into this article, you do have to wonder if they came about from the mixing of these animals, which was said to have been happening it was the Nephilim, I believe, in the book of Enoch. So I have that right here, and it says here, and all the others together with them took unto themselves wives, that's speaking of the watchers, and each chose for himself one, and they began to go in unto them, and to defile themselves with them, and they taught them charms and enchantments, and the cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants. And they became pregnant, and they bare great giants, whose height was 3,000 ells, who consumed all the acquisitions of men. And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. And they began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and to devour one another's flesh and drink the blood. So here, this is one thing that I'm not quite clear about, because it says, and they began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish. I don't know specifically if it's speaking of the watchers or of the giants, because it goes from speaking about the watchers to the giants, and it seems that it's speaking about the watchers here, but it was just talking about the giants here. This is why it's so important to have clarity with your pronouns, like your English teacher always used to tell you. But that, that is one idea for if these creatures have any truth to them at all whatsoever. Could they have been some sort of hybrid creature? And the same would be true of the doghead men and, even Sasquatch. Any of these things. I've talked before about, satyrs and centaurs and the chimeras that you see, even the Sphinx, all of these things, there's a possibility that they may have come about from the mixing of the animals. And there's no small amount of artwork depicting these. And I actually found another map too. My computer, for some reason, is going super slow. But anyway, right here, so it shows, again, them down here in Brazil. And here they are. So let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. And you can see it right there, the Blemyes. AncientOrigins.net has this to say: the Blemyes were first described 2,500 years ago in the histories, written by the 5th century BC Greek historian Herodotus. We've heard a lot about Herodotus today. Headless creatures with eyes in their chests. Yes, we should have that memorized by now. According to Herodotus, these creatures inhabit the western part of Libya, which is supposed to be very hilly and thickly wooded and teems with wildlife. In addition to these headless creatures, this part of the world is said to be the home of such strange creatures as enormous snakes, donkeys with horns, and dog-headed creatures, all of which the historian tells his audience are not merely the stuff of fables. Herodotus, however, does not give these headless creatures of Libya a name. So now I'm here on good old Wikipedia, and I've scrolled through most of the article because we've already read, most of what it says there. But this is something different that we have not learned yet. Headless men, and this is from non-Western sources, headless men also appear in several Asian legends. Breast-eyed races are recurrent in the Zoroastrian scriptures, such as the Bunda-shin, the Jamas Namag, and the Drocht-i-Asurig. Men without heads, and others whose eyes and mouth were on their chest, are mentioned later by the Persian polymath Al-Qazwini as inhabiting the island of Java. In the Indian epic Ramayana, the demon Kabanda is a headless creature with one eye in the middle of his stomach and with extra long arms. He is cursed to remain in this form until released by Rama. In the Chinese classic text, Classic of Mountains and Seas, the god Jingtian is described as having no head, and with his nipples as eyes and his belly button as a mouth. This is because he got decapitated in a battle against Huang Di. The yokai Donatsura in the Japanese folklore is depicted as a headless man with his face on his torso. Just as there has been speculation throughout the centuries about the Blemyes, there is also contemporary speculation as well, and I really enjoyed a thread in the comment section for my doghead video, because there were people discussing different characters that we have in our entertainment that some people are saying, hey, could these be depictions of Blemyes? So here we have Gumby and his crew, and it certainly looks like some of them could pass for Blemyes, doesn't it? Another example that people gave was Mr. Peanut. Could he possibly be an example of what someone might call a modern day Blemmy? And this is all fun speculation. We've got SpongeBob. Yeah, I think he's the most Blemmy-like of them all so far, if you ask me. And then another one that I had actually thought of today is Humpty Dumpty. Could we look at him as a modern day Blemmy? I don't know. But I just thought that this whole topic was super fun, and I hope that you enjoyed it. That's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them down below. And if you like my work and would like to support my page or my channel, I will leave a link in the description to my channel membership, or you can just click on it right on my channel page. And I hope you have a great day.